Around a decade ago, filmmaker Andrew Stanton gave a TED Talk on the fundamental aspects of good storytelling. Using examples from the films he's worked on, such as Toy Story and WALL-E, he explains how he goes about creating a story with flawed but likable characters. One of the many points of his lecture is that every character has a spine or central drive that motivates their actions and explains their goodness and flaws.
All well-drawn characters have a spine. And the idea is that the character has an inner motor, a dominant, unconscious goal that they're striving for, an itch that they can't scratch. And these spines don't always drive you to make the best choices. Sometimes you can make some horrible choices with them.
This idea has stuck inside my brain ever since I first saw this presentation. I believe it's the philosophy behind why Pixar films are both so compelling and relatable, and also why they have a noticeable absence of powerful, iconic villains. Because animation generally appeals to a younger audience, the themes they communicate tend to be things related to self-discovery and empathy, usually contextualized in a conflict between the protagonist and the self, or society, or nature, because those are conflicts that are especially relatable to kids. As you can imagine, it's not easy to tell these kinds of stories while also including powerful, Machiavellian, evil antagonists. Because they don't really fit into the kinds of stories Pixar wants to tell. It's for this reason why I feel like Puss in Boots is so exceptional, as the film manages to contain both rather adult themes of accepting mortality and embracing humility, while also giving us not just one, but several iconic villains that are each unique and do a lot to subvert the established storytelling tropes that we're all used to in animated films. So in this video, I would like to examine each of the major antagonists in Puss in Boots, and explain why they work so well for this movie and how they subvert the storytelling tropes we've come to expect for villains.
Now, make with the map, or we'll see what the unicorn horn really does.
You're not gonna shoot a puppy, are you, Jack?
Yeah, in the face. Why?
I feel like Jack Horner is almost underappreciated in this movie, which is kind of funny because when he first appeared on screen, I kind of felt an internal groan well up in me because his design is so disproportionate and absurd. He's got those long, lanky legs supporting that giant barrel of a torso with chunky gorilla arms, topped by a baby head and an atrocious bowl cut.
Look at this dude. Look at the top of his head.
Everything about his design screams, I am going to be absolutely obnoxious and ruin every scene I'm in. But I was surprised by how quickly he won me over. Almost instantly, I became a Jack Horner supporter. He's just unabashedly evil, and he's not only fully aware of that fact, he revels in it. Fun fact, I don't think there's a single scene he's in which he's not actively killing someone or people aren't indirectly dying because of him.
Aren't you gonna help him, Jack? You're losing a lot of men.
I'm not really stressing about the manpower. I've got a bottomless bag of magic weapons. These babies are gonna get me that wish even after the whole team is dead and gone.
And it's then made clear he's not made to be even remotely sympathetic. I just love that the writers decided to make Jack's backstory a complete parody of what we're used to getting from these movies. Instead of having endured anything actually traumatic, Jack bemoans his childhood spent growing up in a loving home with all his needs and much more met where nothing harmful ever occurred to him, eventually inheriting an enormous sum of wealth and power through his family's successful pastry business. Jack Horner had everything go right in life, yet he still turned out to be a horrible and cruel magic hoarding kingpin. I'm not exactly sure how the writers extrapolated all of that from like 3 lines of a simple nursery rhyme, but I'm all here for it. This directly subverts everything we know about why villains exist. In animation, villains are victims of their circumstances. They are not born the way they are. Tai Lung, Lord Shen, Syndrome, Kingpin, and others are all villains of equal cruelty, but with them we were always provided with a tragedy or a sympathetic reason as to why they went bad. Because logically, bad things must have happened to a person in order for them to be bad. It's the logic of the Joker that we're all one bad day away from becoming a villain ourselves. But that's not true to reality, is it? No, people who've had it well their entire lives have the potential to be some of the worst humans imaginable. I don't think it's a coincidence that the writers decided to make Jack Horner an exorbitantly wealthy business mogul who wants to hoard all the magic in the world for himself and doesn't care about the lives of the workers he will expunge in order to achieve that. I can't seem to think of anybody I know that sounds like that. In this way, we're not meant to sympathize with Jack Horner at all, but we still love him because he's totally embraced being a narcissistic evil person, and in animation at least, that is a lot of fun.
That was horrible! Your wish is horrible! You're horrible! You're an irredeemable monster!
What took you so long, idiot?
If there's one thing that makes the wolf an effective villain, it's the wholesale commitment to the single idea that he is a genuine threat. Prior to his appearance, the film had been moving at a breakneck pace, filled with romp and jokes and fun action. Puss in Boots is the life of the party. He defaces the governor's belongings and home, effortlessly evades the law, and defeats an enormous stone giant with ease. You get the sense that, in this world, there are no consequences for Puss in Boots. He's supremely confident in who he is, and nothing could ever break him. We see almost immediately following the bombastic opening that Puss in Boots' swashbuckling, carefree nature is really not all it's cracked up to be. After the action dies down, he's sitting alone in an empty bar, drowning himself in presumably alcoholic milk. Not exactly the look of a happy hero. It's just a little hint into the fact that there is something deeply empty about Puss in Boots' life before that flaw is wholly exposed by the villain.
Was the legend so big, there was no room for anyone else?
And when the wolf appears, the film does everything to let you know that your confidence in Puss in Boots' immunity to danger is misplaced. In stark contrast to the bombastic and loud opening of the film, in this scene the soundtrack is completely silent, allowing only for the howling of the wind and the chiming of the bell tower and other night ambiance to permeate the soundscape. It's a not so subtle way of letting the audience know something is very wrong here, and what we've come to expect might quickly change. Aside from a few visual gags, the film doesn't compromise the feeling of unease with any jokes or Marvel-style humor. The threat posed by the mysterious wolf is played completely straight.
All right, let's get it over with. Fear me if you dare.
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
Puss in Boots confidently challenges his new adversary, but his sword is immediately taken from his paws and he's forced to pick it up, literally and figuratively disarming him. The cocky arrogance he always had starts to slip. Notice how in doing so, Puss in Boots also becomes lower in frame. When the scene began, the two characters were positioned at an equal height, but now the wolf dominantly towers over him. I think the wolf's threatening aura is largely the result of the surreal presentation that the animators decided to give him. Instead of seeing his character enter the bar, he just sort of appears in the shot with no anticipation for his arrival. When Puss in Boots hides in the bathroom, instead of following a realistic walking animation, the shadow of the wolf unnaturally grows into frame. And of course, whenever he clashes his sickles together, the sparks of light emanating from his weapons illuminates his eyes and gives them a glossy appearance. This might be a strange comparison, but the principles used to make the wolf an intimidating character are the same used to make the monsters from Courage the Cowardly Dog so iconic, such as the ghost of Ramses. Their visual design and presentation on screen breaks the established rules for their respective animation styles, and because of that they feel unnatural and otherworldly, which is fitting since the wolf is quite literally the incarnation of death. And it was a really good choice to make the wolf death, because in that way he's more like a force of nature than he is a living, complicated person which is perfect because nothing short would have been enough to change Puss in Boots into the person he becomes at the end of the film. Would Puss in Boots really have been scared of a mortal bounty hunter? Maybe, but that's far less compelling than the idea that he is afraid of the embodiment of mortality coming for his life and robbing him of his legendary status. And I just love the visual symbolism used in the final battle to illustrate the ways in which Puss in Boots has changed since they first met. When Puss in Boots gets disarmed during the fight, instead of being forced to run away as he did previously, he's able to deflect the wolf's killing blow with the tiny razor blade given to him by his friend Kitty Softpaws, symbolically saying that their relationship is the thing that has saved him and is what is giving him the will to fight. And it leads to the roles being reversed, with Puss in Boots commanding the wolf to take up the fight with him. He did this when they first met, but now he's no longer convinced of his own immortality. He knows he's vulnerable. He still flinches and he's still very scared. In this way, both of the major antagonists of Puss in Boots subvert the established villain tropes we're accustomed to seeing in animated movies. They are not complicated, tragic characters with deeply conflicting emotions like we have seen so many times before, but instead are rather one-note, but in the best way possible. And that's all I got to say about the new Puss in Boots movie. Great movie, definitely a sleeper hit. Apparently it's made like $250 million at the box office so far, which is not surprising given how good it is. It's one of those films that proves that word-of-mouth marketing is still super important, which can only happen if the film is good. And for me, it was. It was the most enjoyable movie I saw in 2022. Anyway, see ya.